We know that bass love to hide and hang out in cover. Well, how do we go about dissecting that awesome looking place? Well, one thing that I have learned from spending a lot of hours filming bass underwater is that they are often in schools or groups much larger than I initially thought. Well, because of that information, it changes the way I approach dissecting a really nice piece of cover. Now here off behind me, we've got a tree that has fallen into this river system, and it's fairly large. It goes out here a ways, and this particular one is sitting in some shallow water, but you kind of get the general idea of what I'm going to be talking about here. It used to be when I would approach a piece of cover like this, I would often pitch a jig or Texas rig or something right up into the best looking spot or the area that I thought would be the highest percentage of holding a big fish. I would go ahead, and that's the way I approached it. Well, after spending time with cameras underwater, I now realize that way more often the bass are in really, really large groups and schools. So that I have changed my approach and mindset to dissecting a good piece of cover. The first thing that I'm going to do is start out here on the outside edges. A lot of times these tree limbs and branches are going to work their way down into the water much farther out than we might think they are. So I'm going to see if I can catch a bass or two out there on that outside edge first. And then I'm going to move in a little bit and then throw my jig or chatterbait or whatever, just a little bit closer to the main core of the cover. Now, when I've worked the outside edges, and I hopefully have caught a couple, when I'm ready to start to fish up towards this area or farther into it, I'm going to work the top part of the water column. So I'm going to bring those jigs or whatever lures I've got, I'm going to bring them right along the top of those branches that are hanging in the top part of that water column and try to catch some fish that are there. Once I have covered that, I'm going to go ahead and start to work my way down and eventually get my lures all the way to the bottom and work that lake or riverbed that is below this type of cover. So I really have a multi-step approach now, and the goal or the idea is to not spook or scare off the remaining fish that are there. If I cast into what I think is the best place first and I catch a 2-pounder out of there, it's likely going to drive the rest of the fish either away or put them on edge and turn the potential bite off. But if I start to catch some on the outside edge, move in and work the top part of the water column and then drop down to the bottom portion of the water column, the odds of me catching more than one bass go way, way, way up. And the neat thing about this approach is, let's say you go out on a nice evening and maybe you have a 10-fish day. By approaching cover this way, dissecting it like this and knowing and understanding there's probably multiple fish on a large piece of cover, you could go from a 10-fish evening to a 20-fish evening. I'll take those type of numbers every single time. Now, as far as lures for this type of situation, there's several that really, really stand out. One is going to be obviously a flipping jig for me with a twin tail grub as a trailer, because I can fish it both vertically and horizontally without changing anything. I don't have to change the weight of the jig or swap out the trailers. That twin tail grub allows me to swim it nice and effectively, but it also drops really well also. So a flipping jig is probably one of my #1 choices here. Crankbaits, if I have a couple different crankbaits, a deep diver and a square bill, you can crawl deep diving crankbaits, and that could be something that I do on this type of cover, or fishing something like a bladed jig, and of course about any Texas rig plastic is going to work. But my goal is to be as efficient as I possibly can, and that's why probably a flipping jig with a twin tail grub trailer is going to be my go-to in this type of situation. Now, as far as jigs go, and if you would like to watch a video on what I think are the 4 best lures for skipping, go ahead and check this one out right here. And believe it or not, there's some that are easier to skip than a jig. And hey, don't forget to go out and encourage someone today. You never know how you might just change their life. For the Bass Fishing Life, I'm your host, Steve Rogers.